Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. It is new to 2018 concrete part 2 to continue on from the first concrete one that we covered last week. My name is Mark Lau and I will be going over the webinar today. So the things that we'll be covering today in this webinar, for member types we will be covering cast-in-place columns and cast-in-place beams. For those cast-in-place columns, we will also add the column dowel component to that. And then for the cast-in-place beam, we will be adding additional bars beam component. A couple other components we'll add would be wall opening or wall dowel component. We'll be talking about enhancements to the concrete wall opening. We will cover footing step templates that are new. Rebar schedule template enhancements. We've added a couple of member types in there. We've got rebar rounding and then rebar piece marking options that we will cover today. So first here we are going to start out. I've got an existing model in here. We're going to add in some cast-in-place columns to start out with. So I'm going to come in here and grab my two slabs that are already in here. I'll go ahead and right click and go ahead and hide these members, make it a little bit easier to see within the model here. So I'm going to start out, I got my pad footings already in here, so I'm going to go ahead and open up my view here to my top of footing, 96'6". I'm going to come in along grid line AA, I'm going to add in my continuous or my cast-in-place columns. So I can either go to my model drop down, member, add, and then I have in my prompt for member type or F2, I can come in here and I have my cast-in-place column. So I'll go ahead and run cast-in-place column. I'm going to go here on grid line 1 and grid line AA. It's going to come up and my first option here is going to be my template. So like we had covered in new to 2017 webinar back a year ago, for our columns we have our template here that we can go ahead and pick. I'm going to go ahead and browse here. So browse will bring me to a list here of templates that have been created for concrete columns here. So I'm going to come out and I'm going to go ahead and pick this 24 by 24 and then the 10 at 10 318. Go ahead and pick that here. Next, we've got rotation of the column, our strength and our sequence, and then we have a finish here. So again, smooth, broom, stamped, you've got your different options. We'll go ahead and leave these options here until we actually have the cast-in-place column shown so that we can go through and set some different options with that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'll go ahead and set my height first. So my end elevation is 96'6" that I placed in here. I'm going to go ahead and my second floor starts out at 112'8". So I'm going to go up to my second floor here. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And I will just copy it down the line. Okay, so now if we go back to our original column here, you can see that it placed in my vertical bars in here off of my template. So when I went to browse and pick my template, I've got my option created here for my vertical bars, and where that is actually pulling from is going to be in my options, concrete job setup, and then I have my concrete column templates that we had covered in a previous webinar here. So if I go ahead and grab this one, you can see that I've got my vertical rebar here on the outside, and then I'll have also have my ties, We'll cover putting in ties here in a little bit here on the column, but just wanted to show where the templates come from. Go ahead and hit OK here. So with that, in our rebar settings now, we've got a minimum bar length, so how long do I want the shortest bar length? I've got a maximum bar length that I can control before it needs to have a splice and have a new piece of rebar, so whatever's being ordered there. And then you also have your lap length. So one thing I'll show here is, let's say max bar length, I know this is this column here. Let me go ahead and change my bar length to 10 foot here for my max bar length, and then I've got a lap splice or lap length of 3 foot. So if I go ahead and hit OK, you can see now if I change my selection filter to rebar, when I hover over it, you can see that there is there are two different pieces of rebar here, and then there is a splice. So to show that splice here is I have my options for my bar division type here. So for my splice right now, it's set to lap splice bars in line, so that's where they're just in line with each other. If I go ahead and set it to bars offset, go ahead and hit OK here, and now you can see that it has offset the bars here, and you would have the 3 foot lap length. Maybe I want to change that to a 1 foot lap length. I can go ahead and hit OK. You can see that the lap length is a little bit different here. So you'll have your 1 foot lap length. The last option there for bar division type is, instead of just offset, I can do a crank splice. If I go ahead and hit OK, you can see that it will crank my splice there. Have your little offset, and then have your lap length there. So let me go ahead and turn these back on here. I might just do a bar offset. The last option here in your rebar settings for cast in place column is your include vertical bars. So if you do not want those included, you can always uncheck that option, go ahead and hit OK, and then you will just have your regular cast in place column here. So I'll go ahead and turn that back on. Coming into your bottom end settings and top end settings. So you've got your elevation here at my bottom. I've got a material setback. So that's going to set the material of the cast in place column. So the concrete here, it will set it off the work point. So if I come in here and say 1 foot 0, hit OK, you can see that from my 96 foot 6 here, it's going to hold it back the foot for my material setback. Next, I have an option to extend vertical bars. So for either my bottom end or my top end, I can extend my vertical bars. So if I extend them, I have an extension length. Maybe I want to put in, maybe go 2 foot past here, and maybe next option I have for extending vertical bars is my hooks. So maybe I want to do a 90-degree hook here. Next, I have my different options for my orientation. So center out, center in, horizontal and vertical, in and out, and then up, down, left, and right. So I'll leave this center out to show right now. And if we get in a top view here, it's going to go center out. My different locations, so you can see how it's extending into my footing here. I want to do a horizontal out. You can see how it's gone one direction, or gone both direction here in the horizontal. I can also set it to vertical to be able to switch directions, and then I've got my top and bottom, left and right will do the same there as horizontal and vertically, but go just to one side. Next, I've got an option to be able to crank. So maybe if I'll show a crank at the top here. when we go ahead and add in another cast in place column on the top. I'll show that you can do a crank if it's a smaller size cast in place column. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here. Next, what I'm going to do is add in cast in place columns, maybe a different size going from the second floor up to the roof here. So I'll go ahead and open up my second floor framing plan here. Then I'll come in and going to model in my cast in place columns again. This time I'm going from 112'8" to the top would be 123'0". And I'm going to change my size from a 24 by 24. I'm going to change this to an 18 by 18. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that option to extend the vertical bars. I'll go ahead and hit OK here. Continue putting them in. Okay, so it remembered it from my extensions here. So what I can do to be able to change any of these extensions is I can go ahead and edit all three of them. And then what I can do is come in here where I've got my hook. I'll go ahead and set no hook. Go ahead and hit OK. And now it's back to how it was originally. So what I'm going to do now is come in and show the crankability here. So at the top end of my bottom column, I can extend this bar. Let's go 1 foot. And then I will go cranks. And maybe I just want this value here. So I've got my first value of how far it's going to go into the other part, and then I have my length past my extension, and then also the crank in value for what that angle is going to be. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here, and now that you can see that it's going to crank those in to line up with your other ones. So with that, we have shown that inside the cast in place column here that you do have options to extend bars. So if I'm extending vertical bars, it will extend those bars through with the cast in place column. We do also have an option here to be able to add a column dowel. So if I go ahead and select my footing here and do my, or if I select my cast in place column, select my component add, I have a column dowel component that I can add. Go ahead and hit OK here. So first of all, I've got my type, so I can do straight or cranked. So I'm going to leave this one at straight. Then I have my rebar size. Maybe I want to come up to a number 8. Next, I have my embed and lap. So embed of value and my lap value here. Maybe I'll change this to 3 foot and maybe this just to 2 foot. Or the other way around. 2 foot here and 3 foot for my lap. Next, I have the options for hooks, so I can go ahead and do a 90 or 180, so I may go 90 with the center out like we had talked about with the extend vertical bars. And then crank options would come available if I change this type to a cranked. So I'll go ahead and leave straight here. Go ahead and hit OK now, and now you can see that it places those column dowels within inside the pad footing here. So I can do the column dowel from a cast in place column to a pad footing. I can also do column dowel from cast in place column to cast in place column. They need to be touching, so I'll go ahead and select this cast in place column, run my component add again, and pick my column dowel. It's going to come up. This time I'm going to say cranked. Maybe set my value down here. Go ahead and click OK, and you can see that now I have my column dowel cranked in to be able to add it. Next, we will be covering our cast-in-place beams. We'll go ahead and model them in here. I'm going to go to my foundation plan here, 98'0", and I might go up here another 1.5 feet. Go ahead and model them in. So same thing with cast-in-place columns. If I go to my model drop-down member and add, I've got my prompt for member type, or F2. Right next to the cast-in-place column, I have my cast-in-place beam here. So what I'm going to do here is set up a couple of construction lines when adding these in. Go ahead and hit OK here. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to be able to add in the cast-in-place beam. So if I go ahead and add my cast-in-place beam here, I can just go ahead and pick the center line here of where my cast-in-place column is. So I'll go ahead and pick this point. I'm going to run all the way down. So cast-in-place beam allows you to go through your cast-in-place column, so you can do it as one full line here for the cast-in-place beam. So I'll go ahead and pick this option here. Now with my cast-in-place beam it's going to come up and ask me for a template here. So that comes from also my job setup for my beam templates here. So for the first one, I'm going to go ahead and pick the GB1. Then I have my different strength and sequence and finish, like we had talked about with cast-in-place columns. I've got my options for my minimum and maximum bar length here. And then next I have my include top and bottom bars. So if I go ahead and just click OK here, what I can do is when I show here is I've got my top and bottom bars here. So if I want to, I can uncheck that, go ahead and hit OK, and you can see that it removes my top and bottom bars if I do not want them. Also to show with this is, if you notice, when I highlight the cast-in-place beam, that it's coming to the edge of my cast-in-place column, but the material stops there. It recognizes where the material of the cast-in-place column is, but it also will extend in your rebar from your cast-in-place beam into the cast-in-place column. Same thing here is it stops the material on the faces of the cast-in-place column, but still runs your rebar through. So you've got all your different options here. Okay. Let me get something here real quick. Get the elevation here. All right. So to carry on with the cast-in-place beam, I may come back in here and edit, is you notice with the cast-in-place beam that my lap length is in a different location than my cast-in-place column. For the reason of is I'm going to be able to have options for my top bars and my bottom bars with my cast-in-place beam. So we had talked about it before, is I can do a lap splice of bar inline. I can do one offset or crank splice. So maybe I want to do my top bars, do an offset here. And then I have my overlap here. By default, auto's 2'6". I can take that off to change it. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And now you can see that it is now offsetting my top bars, the 2'6" with the lap. I can also set it to a crank and be able to set that up. So now you can see that my crank value is to right here. So with that being said, is to start out where your crank is at or where your splice is at, I can come in here. I'm going to go ahead and add a construction line. Go ahead and add it here to where the end of my cast in place beam, the point that I had selected here. And then I can go ahead and add in my 2 points here. Then I will add in construction line straight across. So now this value here is going to be 6 inches. So you can see that my crank lap here dimension is 6 inches, so that's where that value comes from. Next I have auto splice location. So by default that's just going to take my lengths that I want for min and max bar and be able to account for that. If I want to, I can come in here and go ahead and take off auto splice and then be able to tell where I want the splice length. So maybe I want one, let's say 4'0" is my first one. So I'll go ahead and add that. Maybe go 8'0", add 12'0" and add. So now what we can do is come in here and from my construction line here, go ahead and go 4 foot over. I'll change it to yellow so it's easier to see. Go ahead and add. To be able to place it over, which it should be, the splices will be controlled from the left end for that. So you'll have that for the top and bottom bars here. Next we'll get into our left end and right end settings. You've got your end elevation. Next you have your material setback. So if I come in here and set this back 2'0", go ahead and hit OK. You can see that it is throwing it back in this value, the 2 foot offset from the left end. You also have your top and bottom bar offset, and then your top vertical bar offset and your bottom vertical bar offset here. So for your bottoms, if I go 2 foot and 2 foot here, you can see that it extended it past my 2 foot. So maybe in this case, maybe I want to go minus 4 inches. And now you can see that it moved my spot where my horizontals go to. Then also you can see here in the image that I've got my verticals. So maybe I want this to be minus 6 inches or 6 inches. And now you can see that my hooks are only my 6-inch value here. remove my splice locations and just let it do an auto splice. I'll go ahead and set it back to offset here for both the top and bottom bars. And now what we can add to the options here is we have a component called additional bars beam component that we can add to be able to add in extra reinforcements around either the bottom here of the cast in place beam or for the bottom bars and top bars here around where the support is at. So if I go ahead and select my cast in place beam here, go ahead and run the additional bars beam option, you'll notice that it gives me my different options here. So top bars over support, bottom bars over support, bottom bars and span. So I'll have 3 different options. So we'll go ahead and cover all 3 of these. I'll go ahead and pick my top bars over support. So when I go ahead and hit OK here, it's going to be talking about the top bars in my cast in place beam. First option here is called support index, and what that is if I drop that down, you'll see that I have 4. So what that support index is talking about is it's every time that you will be, you'll have a cast in place column there that the beam is going through there or meeting up with that cast in place column. So the first one, index 1, is going to be on my left end here, the first one I go to. Next I've got size, so maybe increase this. Next I have my number of bars, so how many bars do I want to add in there? So right now I'll just leave it as 1. I can give it a hook option. And then I have, in this case, since it's going to be coming from the left end here, it's going to say my right length, the right length here. And then also have a leg length. So let's just go ahead and click OK here. Now you'll go ahead and see that it adds it in, adds an extra piece in here and does the hook following my top bars. So with this component is I can come back in here and edit it, and you can see that I've got my additional bars area here that I can be able to modify. So maybe I want to change this to 4 foot from the right end, and then maybe I want to go 4 leg length. I'll go ahead and click OK here. And now you'll notice that my 4 foot got longer here, and then you'll notice that it extended my, or that it shortened my bend piece here. So also if I want to, when I go to add a hook, this is actually going to be for whatever end is free to be able to change that's not actually going into the cast in place column here, matching the other bars. So if I go 90 here, it's going to go ahead and put a 90 degree on my right end there. Okay, next thing we will do is we're going to add in another additional bars beams. And this time I'm going to do a bottom bars cover over support. I've got my support index 1 here. Number of bars, maybe I want to do 2 this time, and I'll leave the rest of the values. So now you can see that it added 2 bars in here at the bottom when I only have my 1 bar up top. We'll continue adding this component in. So then what I could do is for the top support, maybe now go to index 2. So what index 2 will be is the next cast in place column here in the line. Now you'll notice that I have a left length and a right leg length here option. So if I go ahead and hit OK, you'll see now that it is adding in 2 bars, and what it is doing is it's going from the center of this cast in place column, and it's going to go 2 foot over to the right and 2 foot over to the left. Another way to be able to edit this component, if I drop my selection filter down to custom component, I can just highlight over the bars here and bring up my additional top bars component. And maybe this time I want to be able to add 90s. What this will do here is it's going to add 90-degree hooks here on the end, on both sides. So if I go ahead and hit OK, now you can see that it added my 90-degree hooks on both sides. So if I wanted to, I could come down here and add maybe a bottom bar option for the third one. So if I go bottom bars over support, I can come up here and pick my third index, maybe leave the same thing, and now you'll notice that I've got my additional bars down here at the bottom. With that being said, if I have another cast in place beam here, go ahead and add the component here. I'm going to go ahead and pick my bottom bars and span just to show is what it's going to do is it's going to take the center of the length of that cast in place beam, and then you'll have your leg lengths left and right from that point. So if I go ahead and hit OK here, you'll notice that from the center of my beam, cast in place beam, it's going to go 2 foot in both directions. So maybe if I go in here and change this to 8 foot for my left leg, you can see that it's going to extend that left leg even further. So you can be able to set it for the whole length, but that left and right length pulls from the center of that cast in place beam. To add on for components here, since we just talked about the cast in place beam and the cast in place column, is both options can have ties added. So we saw in our setup, so if I come up here to my setup again, concrete job setup, and then go to either my concrete column template or beam template, you can see when I selected one of these that it's got my template, or it's got ties in here. Same thing for my beam. So if I come in here to my concrete beam templates, I had picked GB1. You can see that I have my ties in here with my additional bars there. So what I can do is I could go ahead and pick all 4 of my columns, go ahead and do component add. I've got my tie zone, and then I'll just pick a point here. So with my tie zone, like we have covered before here, I've got my start and then my end here. So maybe I just want to go 2 foot to be able to have different spacing here. So maybe I'll go 4-inch spacing. Go ahead and hit OK. And you can see that I've got my ties in here. Maybe I need to change the size of them is pulling from my template. If I needed to be able to change that, I could select it to manual and be able to change my different sizes. Let me go ahead and select my column again here, do another tie zone. And this time maybe I'll go 2 foot 0 up to my 14 foot 0 here for a distance, and maybe change my spacing back to 1 foot 0. You can see that it's going to add it back up, and then what I can do is go ahead and add one last tie zone here and go 14 foot 0, maybe up to 16 foot 0, depending on the height, and then go back to my 4-inch spacing again so that it can be able to add that in. Also, we can be able to add that to our beam also. So if I go to cast in place beam, I can run my tie zone here. and I'll go 0 to 2 foot, have my tight spacing, go ahead and add my tie zone in again here, go from 2 foot to 16 foot, 1 foot spacing, and then I'll also go ahead and add one more, and this one from 16 to 18 with a tighter spacing again. So you can see that it adds it along. So you would continue adding them along your Castinplace beam here. One last thing to show here for my Castinplace beam is you notice that it set back the beam according to the column when I picked from one point to the next point and allowed it to be one member. You also, with Castinplace beams, if you want to, is you can be able to add it in between, add the Castinplace beam in between the two columns. So if I come in here and be able to pick my points, maybe I'll call it GB7 here, go ahead and hit OK, and be able to show that you can go between the two columns just by picking construction lines for the faces of your columns. Next option we will cover here is our wall dowel component. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here, and maybe what I want to do here is open up my grid line 1. Go ahead and surface. So right now I've got a concrete wall right here, and then I have a continuous footing here. Next I have a concrete wall and a continuous footing here with a step footing. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and select my continuous footing, go over to my component add option. I have wall dowel. Go ahead and click OK, and now it's asking me up here to select my concrete wall. So the wall dowel tool will be used for concrete walls or for CMU walls. So now I'm going to select this concrete wall, and it will bring up my option here. So in my general settings, I can set my size and then my different options here. Next, I have my placing options. So I can do a inside, a center, and outside. I also have my embed and lap. So embed going into the footing, and then my lap going up into the wall. Then I also have cover for that. And then next we'll cover the hook options and spacing options. So we'll go ahead and hit OK here first to show that it's going to add in my wall dowels here. If I go ahead and change to custom component, go ahead and select these. What I can do is I can do an inside and an outside face instead of center here. Go ahead and hit OK. You can see how it's putting it on the inside and the outside of the wall here. Go back to center here. So next I'll have hook options. So for the start or end hook, start hook will be in your footing and the end hook will be in your wall. So maybe I want to go end hook here with the 90 degree. And I'll leave none for the top, but then you've got hook direction towards the bottom. So inside, outside, or alternate. I'll go ahead and hit OK here. And you can see that it is going all in one direction with my hook. And if I select my footing, you can see that it's actually looking at it to where my left end here is on the right side. So if you hold that footing in the left end of the footing in your left hand, when you say inside, that will bend that 90 degrees towards you. It will come towards the inside of, or towards you will be the inside. If I go ahead and edit them again, you can set it to outside here, or also you have the option to alternate them. And then the last option here is going to be your spacing options. So maybe you don't want them maybe you need them every 2'6". You can see now that it is going to space them out differently here. Okay, next to go in here for our wall dowel is, in this case, I have a concrete wall that, if I highlight over it, I have modeled it in here to where it's at the bottom of the footing, or at the top of the footing here, but I did not use anything to go around the step footing. So if I was to add in the wall dowels, it's just going to follow, it would just follow the wall here. So what I can do to be able to get the wall dowels to see the change with the step footing is I can add in a void space layout to this concrete wall. So if I've got this selected, I can come up here to my component add. I've got void space layout. Go ahead and pick my, need to add in a construction line here. To be able to pick my points, I'll go ahead and run that command again. Pick here. And just make a box around here to be able to do the void space layout like I covered in the previous webinar. I'm going to go ahead and give this 8-inch thick wall. Go ahead and hit OK here. Delete this out and remodel this in for the step. Okay, so now you can see when I select the concrete wall, now it is not hanging over here. So what I can do is select my step footing here. Go ahead and run the wall dowel component. Select the concrete wall. I've got my same options here. I'll go ahead and leave those. I may go ahead and hit OK here. And now you will see that it does change in elevation with the step here, that the wall dowel does recognize the step. Okay, next thing that we will cover here is enhancements to our concrete wall opening. So here my concrete wall, if I go ahead and edit this, I do have my add corner reinforcements here for my concrete wall opening. So the enhancements that have been made to our concrete wall opening is for our reinforcements here, recognizing the edges of the wall here. So right now, it's recognizing this top portion of the wall, so it's going to bend it over so that it allows it in. Same case here. For this rebar up here, since it's too close to the edge there, is we will omit certain rebar or reinforcements if it does not fit in there. So if I go ahead and select my component here, do move component, and maybe move it over 1'0". Now you'll notice that it's able to throw in this reinforcement in here. I can go ahead and move the component again here. Now you'll see that it's straightened out everything. It's got plenty of room. If I go ahead and move this component maybe back over to the 1 foot mark, now you'll notice that just this side has the reinforcements, or the bent reinforcement. So we do recognize the edges of the wall with your concrete wall opening reinforcements. Next option we are going to get into is being able to set up our footing step templates. So in this case with my footing step, or my step footing here, is I've got my different options to be able to add in my reinforcement. So by default my step footing will have a regular template in here for the footing that we've covered in previous webinars, but now we have a step option here. So if I browse, it's going to bring up a list of different templates that we have to use for our steps. So where that comes from is if I come in here and go to my options, concrete job options, concrete job setup, with my templates here, I do have a footing step template now. Go ahead and hit OK. I'll just go ahead and grab the S6 one that we had in our model already. If I want to, I can come in here and be able to edit this. So first of all, I have my concrete profile here. So I can do a parameter to do a run ratio here for this D. I also have a value, which 4 foot here. And then I've got greater of either the parameter or the value. So if I set this at 4, leave this at 4 here, go ahead and hit OK. Go ahead and surface here and add construction lines. If I go ahead and measure, it's going to give me my 4 foot dimension here. If I change that, in here, maybe I want to change it to 3 foot. Hit OK, mark this member for processing and process. You'll now see here, if I go ahead and add construction lines to it again, that when I measure it, it's going 3 foot over for my step there. Yes, be easier to hide this member here to be able to show that distance so far. So if we come back in here to my footing step template, so that was my concrete profile that I can create. Next I have my continuous bars. So for my left bar, I can extend it to my left end, the start of the slope, or the slope face of cover. So you'll see start of slope, slope face cover to be able to set those back and forth. And then you can also do an additional extension. I've got a splice length. I have developmental length where I can add in maybe a value here of 6 inches to be able to add that on. And then a custom to where I can add in my hook there also. For my left end, I can have a hook. So right now I'm at none. I can go up. And then I can also go down here. Then I'll have the same options for my right bar up here. So right now you can see it's 1.6 foot from the right end. So this dash would be the right end. It's going to go 1.6 foot past. I have my same options for my bottom bars here that I can be able to control. Next I have my step bars. So here's bend one location, riser cover. So my cover here, if I come in here, if I go to bar end, it's going to pull it off the bar end here. And then I also have my slope cover. So it will come all the way across and be able to bend up there. I also have an offset here to where maybe I can type in a 4-inch value to where it will extend past where that is my 4-inch value. Next I have my second bend location up here at the top, so at my bar end, so at the end of my top bar here, my step bar, or my step end, so where my step ends here, the dashed line. Then also riser cover, so this is my cover here, so it will bring up here and then bend. And then also you have the same extension here for my second bend, or my offset for my second bend to set it 4 inches past. You'll have the same options for your step bar 2 to be able to add. I have a step bar 3 here of just being able to put a hook piece here, calling it top. I'm just going to do left cover or bottom cover to go past. If I set this so it's going past 0, that's why it's going into the screen there. If I set it to 0, just go into the bottom. My left cover here where it's going down to. I have another step bar to be able to add in here. Next I have my footing ties, so my left location to the start of the step, start of the slope. So right now it's set back because it says skip left edge tie. If I uncheck that, it's going to add in my second one here. Same thing with my right location. I can go ahead and add skip those edge ties. So start a slope, we'll add it all the way across to riser cover all the way across here. And then next you have your tie zone that goes inside your step here. So you've got start of step, so where it's starting it. Maybe if you wanted to offset it 1 inch, I can offset it that inch. I also have end of previous zone. So this is my previous zone here. To be able to change that too. I can also skip my first tie. Then I also have my end location here. So end of step, or a certain distance that I can put in my tie zone with. So if I wanted to go maybe 8, or sorry, that's a 4 foot distance, so maybe I want to go 3 foot. We'll add it across for my 3 foot. And then I can skip last tie, and then I have my spacing here. So maybe if I wanted to go 1'6" to have the spacing in between here. So with that being said, we kind of walked through one that was already created. If I came in here and maybe had one that didn't have any in here already, what I can do is I can go ahead and click the add button, and then I have my step bar. Maybe I want to add a second one here to be able to change my different location, to be able to add in, so that I can add in my different options through here. So that will coincide with the template that I use for my continuous footing. It gives me my options to do for my step options here, to be able to add in my ties and my my different rebar there. Okay, with that being said, we have some new options here with inside concrete options, and then inside my concrete fabricator setup, then I have rebar schedule placements. So we've already covered this in previous webinars, going over like your pad footing, your slab area layout, being able to control your placement notes in the tables on your erection sheets. We have now added a couple new members here for footing step and wall tilt-up panel. So wall tilt-up panels, we can control here of your different options for variables to be able to have it automatically pull your spacing, your lap options here, and then also down, that would be for your like interior, exterior, and center bars, corner bars, and then you also have your for tilt-up panels, and then for your horizontal vertical port openings and diagonal port openings, you have your different controls here for quantity and spacing. And then you can put in here what you want in the placement notes here. So bar each face. You've got your interior lap distance here. So also you can control that with your footing step that we had just gone over. So right now for my bottom bent bars, it's calling a step bottom lap. So what we'll do here is to kind of go over this. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my erection sheet that already has a view on it for my step footing. Okay, so you're talking about if I come in here to my rebar schedule placement option here, is this correct? So being able to, like with your walls, okay. So one thing I can show here is when I come into my, let's say, footing step here, is you can see here that I have my continuous footing here, 23, and you can see over here that I have my step options here, footing step options. So say in here I've got my footing step bottom, so my lap. So what I could do is, since it says bottom, maybe you come in and say, well, I want this to say the full word instead of just the abbreviation here. So bottom here. Go ahead and hit OK. So with that, it will not automatically update. So if I go ahead and click Save here to try to have it update my table here, it does not automatically update here. So the reason with that being said is if I close this down and I come in here, so this is the, right here is CF_23 that has my step footing. If I come in here, I've got my step and everything. If I change my selection filter to rebar and come in here and say edit this bottom bar here in my footing, you'll see that my placement note here, that's actually where it comes from. So when you change your setting in your options there, it is pulling from this placement note. So with that being said, is in order to get that to update, what I can do here is mark the footing for processing and reprocess it. If I come back in here and edit my bottom rebar again, now you'll notice that it has changed. It's got my update, so I'll go ahead and hit OK after updating it. And now what I'll do is go back into Drawing Editor here, bring up my sheet, and now you can see that it now says bottom here, so step bottom. So I can be able to modify those different options in my concrete fab setup, rebar schedule placements, depending on what you're doing it for. We ended up in this case doing it for the footing step, to where I just came in and changed. So the typed in here is just what it's going to show in my placement notes on my table here, and then the percentage will actually go and pull that value. So if it's a percentage lap, it will pull the lap value there. You've got your spacing, and you also have your quantity that you can pull. So your different, so 3 foot 10 lap options there. So with that being shown also is another thing that we can show here too with my, say in my bend schedule here. If I come into my concrete member and material piece, my rebar definitions here, we had talked about our rebar rounding. So when we're talking about segments, you can see my segments here in my bend schedule of where my different segments are. So got some that are regular value, some half, some 3/4. So what I can do here is, instead of going rounding to the nearest quarter, if I go ahead and change this to half, I can go ahead and say OK. Go ahead and save the drawing, and once I save it, you'll notice that it updates it to 1/2 inch. I no longer have any 3/4 of an inch or 1/4 inch. So that is in concrete job setup, rebar definitions, and then you've got your rounding option down here. I'll go ahead and change this back to 1/4. Go ahead and hit OK. I can save my drawing, and now you see it's back to 3/4 here. Covering a couple of new options also. So in my options drop-down, concrete options, in my concrete job setup, in my rebar definitions, I have rebar rounding options now. So for an overall straight rebar piece, I can round to the nearest. I can round up or round down. So this is going to be the inch value here. For my overall bent rebar, I can round to the nearest, up or down to the nearest 1 inch. And then for my segment pieces, I have for my nearest 1/4 inch here that I can be able to change back and forth. So I do have rounding options for my different options here. The last one that we will cover is going to be in your fabricator options, or in your concrete options, concrete fabricator setup, and then you have your concrete member and material piece marking options. Go ahead and open this up, and I have my preferred rebar length designation here. So with that being said, I've got billing or cut. So here in for my billing this is how we will calculate the bar length. Is we're going to calculate every segment in here. We'll add all segments up to get your length. For cut, it's going to be measured along the center line of the rebar. So that's how we will take the length there, is just measuring along the center of that piece of rebar. That concludes my webinar here for concrete part 2.